The wind was already awake when dawn bled across the plains. A low moan through broken fences, a whisper through the bones of the land. That was a morning everything changed for Elias Boone, a man built from dust and silence, a man who thought the past had finished with him. He was wrong. Before we begin this journey, partner, take a second and subscribe. Go on, tap that button, hitch your wagon to this trail, and stay with me till the end, because this story isn't just about survival. It's about what happens when a heart long buried in dirt decides to beat again. The day started like any other. Elias Boone rose before the sun, the weight of years settling on his shoulders, same as always. Coffee black, boots scuffed, hat older than the fence posts he mended. The ranch stretched wide and lonely, a sea of golden weeds waiting for a hand that never rested. He liked it that way. Silence was honest. Cows didn't lie. Wind didn't judge. And the ghosts that followed him learned to keep their distance. But fate don't ask permission. It just rides in, dust first, mercy later. By mid-morning the heat had begun to climb. The horizon shimmered like a mirage breathing. Elias tightened the saddle strap, glanced once toward the road, and that's when he saw it. A figure stumbling through the haze. Barefoot, desperate, each step carving pain into the earth. For a heartbeat he thought she was another ghost. Too soft for this place, too fragile for the sun's cruelty. But the dust that clung to her skin was real. The blood on her arm, real. The way her eyes found his gait, real as the fear chasing them. She collapsed just past the post. Elias moved before thinking, a reflex older than memory. He caught her before she hit the ground, the scent of sweat and iron sharp in the air. No words yet, only breath, quick and ragged, whispering between them like a secret. He carried her inside. The cabin was small, one chair, one bed, a table scarred by years of solitude. He laid her down gentle, found water, and waited for life to return to her eyes. Outside, the world held its breath. Time stretched then. The woman's chest rose, fell, rose again. Elias sat across from her, staring at the rope burns circling her wrists like cruel bracelets. He didn't need to ask what happened. The land had seen this kind of cruelty before. Men who treated women like wagers. Debts paid in flesh and tears. He'd buried enough of those memories to recognize another. When her eyes opened, they were the color of storm clouds before rain. Clara May. That name would later carry through his nights like a hymn, but for now it was just a whisper trembling on her lips. No dialogue, no sound, just a knowing. She was alive. Barely. And somewhere beyond that horizon, trouble was coming for her. Elias poured water into a tin cup, steady hands betraying the storm inside him. He'd lived alone for too long. Didn't owe anyone a damn thing. But watching her fight to breathe cracked something open he thought had turned to stone. Hours passed. The light shifted from gold to amber to red. She slept. He stayed by the window, eyes scanning the road, the rifle within reach though he hoped he wouldn't need it. Every creak, which sounded like warning. Every gust of wind carried dust and questions. By dusk, the first sound of hooves broke the stillness. Slow, measured, Elias's jaw tightened. The kind of man who rides alone at sundown ain't looking for company. He stepped onto the porch, the boards complaining beneath his weight. A rider approached, shoulders heavy with drink and sin. The stranger reined in at the gate, eyes red and mean. Words weren't spoken, but the air between them filled with threat. The stranger dismounted, boots striking dirt like hammers. Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. Some men carry their history in the way they stand. And this one knew instantly he'd misjudged his ground. The fight came fast. Fists dust, the sound of flesh meeting years of restrained fury. Then silence again, thick, final. When the stranger scrambled to his horse, the look he left behind wasn't defeat. It was promise. He'd be back, and he'd bring the law. Inside, Clara May stirred, her body trembling, her eyes wide with questions no voice dared ask. Elias closed the door softly, the echo of the latch sealing their fates together. Night gathered around the cabin, dark and endless. He sat near the window till the stars burned through the black. The old windmill groaned like an aging prayer. In the corner, Clara May slept again, her breathing finally even, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias Boone felt something dangerous stirring in his chest. Hope. The morning crawled in slow, dragging the night behind it like an old dog that wouldn't die. Elias Boone hadn't slept. He'd sat through the dark, listening to every sigh of timber, every shift of wind. Out here, the silence told stories if you knew how to listen. And that night, it whispered one name again and again, Clara May. When the first light touched her face, she woke with a start. Her eyes darted to the window, to the door, to the rifle leaning near the chair. The look of someone who's never known safety long enough to trust it. Elias rose slow, poured water into the basin, the scrape of tin loud in the hush. No words passed between them. None were needed. Kindness, out here, was a language older than speech. By noon, Clara May had strength enough to stand. She moved like a shadow across the floorboards, careful, quiet. Elias watched her try to fold the blanket she'd used, her hands shaking. He saw the marks on her wrists, the dirt under her nails, the stubborn dignity she still carried like armor. Something about it made him ache. Not pity, respect. Outside, the land baked on the sun. Wind turned the fields to waves of heat. Elias saddled a horse, fixed a loose rail, did what men like him always did. Kept busy so thinking didn't win. But the thought came anyway. The stranger who'd ridden off last night wasn't done. Men like that never were. That evening, Clara May stepped out onto the porch, barefoot still, though Elias had left an old pair of boots by the door. She stared at the horizon, hair lifting in the hot breeze, and for a moment the world forgot its cruelty. The sun dipped low, painting her in firelight. Elias caught himself looking too long. Then he turned away, ashamed of the warmth creeping into his chest. He told himself he was just protecting her till she could move on, but the truth was heavier. He didn't want her to leave. The next day came dressed in dust and silence. Clara worked beside him without being asked, gathered eggs, swept the porch, mended a torn sleeve, small things, but each one stitched her into the fabric of his lonely days. She hummed once, soft, a tune he didn't know. It floated through the air like grace itself. He paused mid-step listening. And for the first time in years, the ranch didn't sound empty. But peace in the west was a brittle thing. By late afternoon, the horizon darkened again, not with storm, but with riders. Two this time. One he recognized even from afar. The other wore a badge. Dust followed them like a curse. Elias felt the old calm settle over him, the kind that comes before trouble. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stepped out to meet whatever waited. The hooves slowed, then stopped. The man from before sat sneering in the saddle, pride patched over with bruises. Beside him, the law, Marshal Wade, old war comrade, old friend, a man who'd once carried Elias out of battlefield torn apart by fire. Elias met his eyes. The years between them didn't need explaining. Wade swung down, the leather creak of authority heavy in the air. The drunkard spat dust, pointing toward the cabin. Claims, accusations, lies sharpened into weapons, the kind that could kill even without bullets. Wade listened, face unreadable. Then his gaze shifted to the door, to Clara May standing there, steady despite the tremble in her hands. Her story poured out, quiet but clear, the kind of truth that cuts cleaner than any blade. No papers, no vows, just the cruelty of a man who thought women were dead. The air stood still when she finished. Not even the horses moved. Then Wade's voice broke the silence, low and final, like a verdict carved in stone. He told the rider to turn around and keep riding till the wind forgot his name. For a long moment, it seemed the earth itself waited. Then the man spat, glared, mounted, and rode off into the heat. His threats trailed behind him, empty and sour. Elias didn't watch him go. He looked instead at Clara May, the strength in her stillness, the defiance in her eyes. Something inside him shifted again, quiet but certain. He wasn't protecting her anymore. He was standing beside her. Wade lingered, gave a half-smile that held more memory than words. Said something soft about trouble finding them both no matter where they went. Then he tipped his hat, mounted up, and disappeared into horizon, leaving only the echo of hooves fading slow. When the dust finally settled, the ranch fell silent again. A different silence this time. Not fear, relief. The kind that fills the air after a storm when the world remembers how to breathe. Clara May stood in the doorway, sunlight catching the edge of her hair. Elias turned to her, but she looked past him, out toward the field stretching endless and wild. A land that had broken her, now offering her something like peace. Neither spoke. Didn't need to. Sometimes a soul just knows when it's found safe ground. That night, Elias sat on the porch while the lamp flickered beside him. Clara moved inside, soft as a night wind, her bare feet whispering across the wood. He heard her hum again, a sound that reached through the years of silence and rested against his heart like forgiveness. He didn't understand what was happening between them, only that it felt like coming home to a place he didn't know he'd lost. And as the stars crawled across the black, the old rancher realized he wasn't alone anymore. Days passed, slow and sure, like cattle moving through tall grass. Each morning began the same way. Coffee boiling, wind whispering, Clara May stepping barefoot into the light. She'd started tending the garden again, coaxing green from the stubborn earth. Elias watched her hands work the soil, steady, patient, kind. It was the same land that had taken everything from her. And somehow, she was giving forgiveness. He didn't say much. Never had. Words felt small next to her quiet strength. But every fence post he drove, every bucket of water he carried, every board he mended, they were all his way of speaking. And she heard it. Somehow, she always did. By midsummer, the ranch began to feel alive again. Grass came back where dust once ruled. The cattle looked fatter, the soil darker. The air felt different, not just lighter, but warmer. And Elias Boone, a man who'd forgotten what it meant to belong to anything, found himself waiting for her voice in the mornings. The way she said his name like it meant something more than habit. The way her laughter, rare but real, carried across the yard like sunlight through rain. But peace never lasts long on the frontier. Not for men like him. Not for women like her. It happened one evening, just before sunset. A single shot cracked through the air. The sound echoed across the fields, cruel and sudden. Elias dropped the bucket he was carrying and ran. Out past the barn, down the slope toward the fence line. And there, slumped against the post, was the body of a man he thought he'd seen the last of, the drunkard, the one who'd ridden away with hate still burning in his eyes. Now his life had ended in the same dust he'd used to bury others. No sign of who pulled the trigger, just the silence of consequence. Elias stared for a long time. He didn't rejoice, didn't curse. Out here, death was just another kind of justice, the one the earth handled itself. He buried the man without a word beneath the mesquite trees where no one would remember him. Then he walked back to the house, the sun bleeding behind him like a final judgment. Clara met him at the door. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. There was something unspoken between them now, something truer than any confession. Two souls who'd seen too much to waste time on explanations. That night, rain finally came, the first in months. Hard, relentless, cleansing. Elias stood on the porch, letting it soak through his hat, down his neck, into the earth itself. Behind him, Clara May lit a lamp, its glow spilling into the storm like a promise. He turned to her, slow, quiet, and in that small moment, without words, without vows, something changed. Not just in the air, not just in the room, but in the story of their lives. From that night on, there was no question of leaving. Clara stayed, not because she had to, because she chose to. The ranch became theirs, the walls mended by her touch, the land softened by her care. Elias stopped counting the days. Time wasn't something to survive anymore. It was something to share. Season by season, the world turned. Winters came with their hush of white. Summers burned gold across the plains. Elias grew older, his hair silvering like morning frost, his shoulders still broad but softened by years of peace. Clara aged too, though to him she never seemed to. Every time she smiled, It was as if the years fell away and the woman who'd once stumbled through dust was reborn in light. And one morning, a morning just like the one when she first arrived, she stepped out of the doorway, brushed the hair from her face, and said something simple that changed everything. Get inside first, then. Those were the words that had started it all. The same urgency, the same tremble in her voice. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was laughter. And Elias Boone, the rancher who'd once sworn never to love again, finally understood what she meant. He followed her inside. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't walking into a house anymore. He was walking into a home. Years later, folks around those parts still talked about them. The quiet rancher and the woman who came out of nowhere. Some said she'd been running from the devil himself. Others claimed she was an angel sent to save him. But those who'd seen them together, really seen them, knew the truth. They saved each other, not with miracles or heroics, but with patience and the kind of love that grows in silence. When Elias Boone passed, it was a soft dawn. He was sitting on that same porch, hat in his lap, looking out across the fields he'd built and the life he'd finally found. The wind moved through the grass like a hymn. Inside, Clara May brewed the morning coffee, the same way she had for decades. She called his name once, twice, then she knew, and she smiled through the tears because she'd seen this coming, and she wasn't afraid. She sat beside him, her hand over his, the sky turning gold above them, and for the first time since she'd met him, the silence between them wasn't lonely. It was full, complete, peaceful. They buried him beneath the oak near the river bend, the one he'd always called a listening tree. Clara visited every day till her own steps grew slow. And where time came, folks said they heard singing on the wind, a woman's voice, clear and light, carrying across the plains. No one saw her leave. No one saw her go. But some nights, when the moon rises full over the Boone Ranch, the wind still sounds like laughter. Soft, easy content, as if love itself never left. So when you ride out west someday and the land feels too big, too quiet, stop a moment. Listen. You might just hear them. Elias Boone and Clara May. Two hearts the world tried to break, but the earth refused to forget. Because out here, love ain't about words or promises. It's about staying. Through the dust, through the storms, through every sunrise that comes after the dark. And maybe that's a lesson in their story. That sometimes the hardest hearts still find their way home. And sometimes a stranger at your gate isn't the end of your peace. It's the beginning of your forever. Before you go, don't forget, subscribe, stay a while, and keep riding with us down these dusty trails. Because there are more stories out here in the quiet plains. Stories of love, loss, and the wild beating heart of the West. You won't want to miss the next one.